in Central Illinois, if you are seeking CEUs or CPDUs, we have quite a list of people today for professional development. I am going to put in the chat box a link to a Google Doc, and you just need to click on the link for the Google Doc, and in that link you will find a grid. Find your name and initial or check next to your name. Also, if your name in the Zoom does not match your name, please tell us what name you are checked in with by Zoom so I can find you to check you out at the end of the session. To earn your CPDUs and your CEUs, you need to be here for the full session. So again, check in on the Google Doc. If you have any issues, my name is Chelsea Byers, and you can private message me and I will help you, or you can check in with me and I will check you in on the Google Doc. But with so many, this makes it quite easy for us for you to check in yourself. This way you do not get missed. Again, if your name does not match, if you just come in as Mary in Zoom, I might have a lot of Marys on this call, so we need to know who you are. Thank you for joining, and I am going to pass it on to our host, Mary Liz.
Thank you, Chelsea. And we appreciate everyone joining us this afternoon. My goodness, beautiful day, and I think you're in for a treat. Well, as Chelsea said, my name is Mary Liz Wright. I'm a nutrition and wellness educator with University of Illinois Extension, and welcome all of you to the Summer Self-Care Series. This series is a collaboration between Illinois Extension and the Interdisciplinary Health Sciences Institute at the University of Illinois, and is designed to connect those across the state with researchers at the university and provide evidence-based educational programming. If you have any questions during the program, please type them in the chat box. If you're calling in, please hold your questions until the end of the session, and we will give our speaker, Ru, then a chance to answer those questions. And now, without any further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker for this series, Ru Liu. Ru received a Bachelor of Science degree in Food Science and Human Nutrition in 2018, and a Master of Science degree in Nutritional Sciences in 2020 at the University of Illinois. She also recently became a registered dietitian, so congrats to Ru for that. During her time at the U of I, she studied the impact of genetics and early life nutrition on carotenoid status in childhood. Today, she'll be talking to us about the ketogenic diet, gluten-free diet, and intermittent fasting. So welcome, Ru, and I know that I'm looking forward to listening to what Ru's going to share with us. Remember, please turn off your cameras and mute your microphones and sit back and let's all learn something from Ru.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Mary Liz. Let me share my screen. Okay. Let's see. All right. Okay. Hi, everyone. My name's Ru, and I'm really happy to be here. I appreciate the opportunity to be here to talk to you about the diet that you saw on the internet. And today, we'll be focusing on the keto diet, the gluten-free diet, and intermittent fasting. So to start our presentation, I'd like to introduce myself a little bit. So I am originally from China. If you look at the map here, I circled my hometown for you. It's a southern small city in China. And I came here to the US in 2013 to pursue my education. I received a bachelor's degree, like Mary Liz said earlier, in food science and human nutrition with a concentration in dietetics. And I stayed here right at UIUC to pursue my master's degree. And I just graduated this May from the Division of Nutritional Sciences. And 2 weeks ago, I became a registered dietitian. And like Mary Liz said, during my master's program, I studied how genetics and breastfeeding affect carotenoid status in childhood. So after today's presentation, you'll be able to describe the key features of each diet and to recognize which population can benefit from each diet the most, and be able to list the potential side effects of each diet. And to start our presentation today, I am going to ask you a question. Have you tried, or do you know anyone that's tried the ketogenic diet or the gluten-free diet or the intermittent fasting diet? Let me know in the chat box. Okay, I'm seeing a lot of yeses. Okay, a lot of yeses. Great. Okay, so it looks like the majority of you have tried or know somebody that has tried those diets, which is good because you have a context for our presentation today. And if you have never tried those diets, that's totally fine. We're going to talk about those diets in many aspects today. Okay. Okay, so let's start with the ketogenic diet. So what is it? It's actually created almost 100 years ago to treat drug-resistant epilepsy in children. And what it is, it's a very high-fat diet and low-carbohydrate diet. Specifically, 90% of your daily calories are coming from fat. And another key feature of the ketogenic diet is that you're consuming less than 20 to 50 grams of carbohydrates per day. And just to give you a context, one medium-sized banana has about 27 grams of carbs. So 20 to 50 grams of carbs is extremely low carbohydrate intake. And to give you another perspective, it is recommended by the USDA. The dietary guideline says a healthy diet consists of 65% of carbohydrates, 20 to 35% of the calories coming from fat, and 10 to 35% of the calories coming from protein daily. So you can see it's a drastic difference between those two recommendations. And another thing to know is that not all low carb diets are ketogenic. There are many other diets that I'm sure you've seen or you've heard, like the Atkins diet or the South Beach diet. They're all promoting this low carb diet, but they're not necessarily ketogenic. So the key hallmark feature of the ketogenic diet is the state of ketosis, which I'll get into in the next slide. But how much reduction in carbohydrate intake is enough to induce this state varies greatly for individuals. And to make sure that you're indeed in a ketosis state and not just following a low carb diet, you will need to measure your urinary ketone bodies to determine that you're in this state. So now we know what a ketogenic diet plan looks like. How does ketogenic diet work? So normally, when we are consuming a normal amount of carbohydrates, our body uses sugar, which is glucose, as our primary fuel that is preferred. But when our carbohydrate intake is limited, it's so low, our body adapts to use fat as the primary fuel. So if you look at this diagram on the right, so you can see normally glucose will be converted to acetyl-CoA and will enter the TCA cycle and make ATP. But when the carbohydrate is very limited, we'll start to break down the fatty acid and enter this cycle and make those three compounds highlighted, and those are the ketone bodies that you've heard about. And we use those as fuel to fuel your body tissues like your brain and your muscles. And this change, this metabolic change, doesn't happen overnight. It actually takes days to weeks of eating less than 20 to 50 grams of carbohydrates per day to achieve ketosis. Okay. So let's talk about ketogenic diet and weight loss. And for all the diets that we're discussing today, I will be focusing on the relationship with weight loss. There are many other studies on its impact on other disease state or other conditions, but today weight loss is our focus. So there are many studies done looking at the ketogenic diet and low-fat diet. So which one is more effective in weight loss? And what we found is that there's weight more loss observed in the keto diet group at 6 months, but no difference at 12 months, meaning that whether the weight loss can be maintained, we don't know. So we don't know the sustainability of this diet in relation to weight loss. And what's interesting is that it has also been found that even when the ketogenic group had higher total energy intake, weight loss was still greater than a low-fat diet group, which I thought was really interesting. And lastly, there are some studies found the ketogenic diet resulted in a reduction in body fat with preservation of lean body mass. And this is important to know because when we're talking about weight loss and its metabolic benefits, we're not only looking at how many pounds that you lost, but also what the weight is coming from. Is it coming from water or your fat tissues or your lean body mass? So it's good to see that this weight loss, the weight loss that's associated with preservation of lean body mass is what we want. So to summarize what we found from the research is that the ketogenic diet indeed is effective in weight loss, but the sustainability is we still need to look into that. And let's talk about why we're seeing these results. So the short answer is we don't know for sure, but there are some proposed mechanisms. So first, the initial weight loss that you might see when following a ketogenic diet might just be water weight. So from the glycogen depletion, which is your body's glucose storage, that can increase the sodium and water loss from your kidneys. And so the initial weight loss might just be water. And the second proposed mechanism is that ketone bodies might suppress appetite. However, more research is needed in this topic. The evidence is not conclusive. And lastly, following a ketogenic diet oftentimes means that you have limited food choices because you're excluding a lot of foods to maintain such low carbohydrate intake. So with that, you might just lower your total caloric intake, and that might lead to weight loss. So those are some of the possible reasons. Okay. And now we talked about the benefits of ketogenic diet. Let's talk about the side effects of ketogenic diet. So in short term, you might experience constipation, headache, lightheadedness, muscle cramps, diarrhea, general weakness, and rash. And that could all be due to this metabolic change, this shift happening in your body. And the constipation might be associated with the lower fiber intake, which I'll get into, which is actually related to some of the long-term side effects. So in the long term, the long-term side effects are actually not very well studied in adults for more than 12 months. And most studies are conducted in children with epilepsy. So we'll need more research to look at the safety and the side effects of ketogenic diet in the long term, not just for a few months. And more importantly, following a ketogenic diet in the long term, you might be at risk of developing some nutrient deficiencies. Like briefly mentioned before, to keep your carbohydrate intake so low, you will likely need to exclude many food options. So for example, you might, bananas or bread or pasta, the things that are starchy vegetables. When you're excluding carbohydrates, you're also excluding the nutrients that are packed in those foods, such as the B vitamins, the thiamine, folate, and fiber, and some minerals, potassium, and calcium. So in the long term, when you might develop those nutrient deficiencies. And to wrap up the ketogenic diet, there are some other concerns. So a ketogenic diet, maybe at the end of the presentation, those who have try this diet can share, it's very hard to maintain. Like I mentioned before, one banana is basically concludes your daily allowance for carbohydrate intake, and that is very hard to maintain. And on top of that, everybody has different thresholds of carbohydrate intake to achieve ketosis. So that means for some people, you can only eat one banana worth of carbohydrates a day to achieve ketosis, but some might be able to eat 4, but some might only be able to eat a quarter. So it's all very, very different. So it's hard to, if you're just doing this diet at home by yourself, it's hard to monitor whether you're actually in the ketosis state. And when a diet that is hard to maintain, no matter what, let's say you switch to a diet and you lose weight, but if it's hard to maintain, you tend to go back to your regular diet. And let's say you gain the weight back, and then you diet again. That yo-yo dieting, that rapid weight loss fluctuation, it is actually associated with negative health outcomes. And lastly, the metabolic changes associated with a ketogenic diet might interfere with with other health conditions and medications. So it affects the blood lipid levels, so your cholesterol levels, and it might have interactions with certain seizure, blood pressure, and blood glucose medications as well. So that concludes ketogenic diet. Now we're going to dive into the gluten-free diet.
Ru,
Yes.
this is Mary Liz. So could we just break just a little bit? So we had some questions that I think if we address them now, we won't get them confused with the other diets.
Okay.
I really wasn't about that when I said to hold them all till the end, but these are specific to the keto. So can the keto be done on a vegetarian diet?
Keto vegetarian diet, it would be difficult because with the ketogenic diet, you have to consume a high fat intake, and that mostly is coming from animal products. That's coming from meats and dairy. So on a vegetarian diet, which is already limiting, it's another limiting factor adding onto that diet. So it can be very difficult, especially when not monitoring your nutrient intake and not supplementing accordingly.
Right. Okay, very good. And are those carb limits based on net carbs or total carbs? I think what this is in reference to would be on in some situations, people subtract the fiber from the total carbs from the nutrition facts panel on a food package.
I don't think the dietary fiber is included in the carbohydrates limit, but I will have to look into that. But I don't think fiber is included.
Okay. And also just to remind everyone, we are going to save the chat box so that if Ru needs to get back to a question, she'll address that in an email later. So, and then also, yes, we had a couple about, wow, is the ketogenic diet healthy? Is it advised for anyone besides someone with epilepsy?
I think the term healthy can vary, the definition of healthy can vary a lot based on individuals, based on your health conditions. So what's considered healthy for one person might not be healthy for you. And it certainly can be, anyone can try this. It's, there are research showing, we're looking into effects of ketogenic diet on cardiovascular disease, on diabetes. So it definitely could be beneficial for some health conditions.
Okay. And then lastly, can the nutrients lost, and so I think what they're talking about is eliminating certain food groups, can nutrients lost be replaced with vitamins?
I'm assuming vitamins meaning supplements, dietary supplements?
That's what I would, yeah, that's what I would guess. Yeah.
Yeah. I think, yeah, dietary supplements can certainly help you with supplementing the nutrients that you're getting. But the thing with supplements is that even though on label it says that's how much you're getting, your body might not be absorbing that amount. And we know that the nutrients in whole foods are better absorbed than those nutrients packed in a form of a supplement pill.
All right. Thank you so much, Ru, and sorry to interrupt.
No problem at all.
Specific. Let's move on and watch the video.
Yeah, and if you can, for some reason, can't hear the video, could you please let me know, Mary Liz?
Did you share your screen sound? When you shared your screen, if you click share screen at the very bottom left, it'll say share computer sound. So click that button and then you should be good to go.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, it says to share your computer audio, please install the Zoom audio device. Okay, it says, okay, let's just give it a try. So this video, so for a gluten-free diet, we've heard a lot, but surprisingly, a lot of people don't really know what gluten actually is. And let's watch this video. Oops, sorry.
We're not hearing it, but do you mean to pull it up on mine?
Yeah, that would be.
All right, hold on just one second. All right, if you can stop sharing your screen for a second and I will share mine.
Okay.
All right, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Is this the correct video?
Yes, if you just fast forward to maybe like the fifth, a little bit more, right there, perfect. All right, thank you, Kelsey.
This thing you will not eat. So we're going to meet a person who doesn't eat gluten, and together we're going to guess if they know what gluten is. Are you ready? Yeah. What else do you have to do?
Do you maintain a gluten-free diet?
I do indeed.
And what is gluten?
Okay, does he know what gluten is? Oh, everyone says no.
Well, as far as for me, how it affects my body,
But what is gluten?
oh, this is pretty sad because I don't know.
We're 0 for 1. But I hate it, and I know. Next.
Do you maintain a gluten-free diet?
I do.
What is gluten?
All right, does this shirtless gentleman know it? Yes, okay.
Gluten's in bread. It's a flour derivative, wheat, things like that.
It's a flour derivative?
Right? It's like bread, things like that, pastries.
It's in those things?
Yeah, it's in those things.
But what is it exactly?
Gluten is it's like a grain, right?
I like when he coughed. It's like, I'm sorry, I have some in my throat. Excuse me. All right, next.
Do you maintain a gluten-free diet?
Yeah, I try to the best of my ability, yeah.
What is gluten?
Does she know what gluten is? Oh.
It's the wheat in products such as like bread or pastas, rice.
Why do you avoid it?
It makes you fat. I mean, like I said, I haven't researched it to the fullest. I have a girlfriend from Russia. She actually just got me into it. So she's reading a book about it.
Oh, okay. The Russians know about gluten and Putin. They know about both of us. All right, we have one more.
Do you maintain a gluten-free diet?
I do. I actually don't eat rye, wheat, oat, bran, dairy, nuts, or eggs.
Wow. What is gluten?
Does he know, does Jewish John Hamm know what gluten is?
It is part, I believe, of the wheat that, I really don't know. It's in rye, wheat, oat, and bran. So that's what I said.
I gotta go pick my kids up. Leave me alone. Maybe gluten doesn't exist.
you, Chelsea.
You're welcome. You can go share your screen again.
Okay. Okay. Can everyone see my screen okay?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right. Okay. All right, so now we've seen that a lot of people actually, and especially those that actually follow a gluten-free diet, they don't know what gluten is. So why is gluten-free diet so popular? Well, there are a few different reasons. First, there's been a huge media coverage. Many celebrities are adopting and promoting this diet. And you see on social media, I'm sure you've seen gluten-free food advertising. But we also know that just because celebrities are adopting or eating this diet doesn't mean that it's the best for you. And a second one is also very, you definitely have noticed that it's the marketing strategies for gluten-free diet are everywhere. You're going to a grocery store and you see so many products nowadays, you see the GF label on it. And so for me, when I'm doing grocery shopping, I'll be reaching something that I normally buy, and then right next to it is a gluten-free version of it. And indeed, actually more than $15.5 billion were spent on retail sales on gluten-free foods in 2016. And that's more than double the amount spent just 5 years before that. And another reason why it's becoming so popular is that there's an improvement in diagnosing celiac disease. And I'll talk more about this disease in the next slide. But the prevalence of celiac disease actually remains stable. But people who avoid gluten without the disease more than tripled. So with all those factors together, it's now we understand why gluten-free diet is so popular. So let's finally talk about this mysterious substances called gluten. Gluten is not a wheat derivative substances. I forgot what the gentleman in the video said. Gluten is actually a protein found in most grains. It acts like a binder or glue, giving the product a stretchy quality. So if you think about stretching out a ball of dough, and the stretchy part is due to gluten. And if you've tried gluten-free products, you might notice that compared to their gluten-containing counterparts, the gluten-free version is more crumbly and less stretchy, and that's because the gluten is gone. And gluten is in many food sources, mostly wheat, rye, barley, and malt, and those ingredients are in many, many of the foods that we eat every day. So for example, pastas, noodles, breads and pastries, crackers, baked goods, cereal, and beer. And this less commonly known gluten source is soy sauce. And so who must follow a gluten-free diet? So we mentioned in the previous slide that people with, so I just saw a question in the discussion, and there's no gluten in rice. But I will provide a list of the gluten-containing foods at the end. So celiac disease is an autoimmune disease, meaning that your immune system is triggered to attack your own body tissue. And in terms of celiac disease, the gluten is the trigger. So people with a celiac disease, once they ingest gluten, it will lead to an immune response that attacks the small intestine. And if you look at this picture on the right, the finger-like projections are the villi in our small intestine. And those are very important for the nutrients entering our body to be properly absorbed. So in celiac disease, if you have celiac disease and you keep consuming gluten, then those villi will get damaged and so becoming the picture on the right, and that could prevent nutrients being absorbed properly. So in short term, you will experience discomfort, stomach ache, and GI problems like diarrhea. And in long term, you might experience nutrient deficiencies, and that could lead to serious health negative outcomes. Celiac disease affects about 1 in 100 people worldwide, so about 10%, and many are undiagnosed. So another group of people that might follow a gluten-free diet, might need to follow this diet, is those with non-celiac gluten sensitivity and wheat allergy. Those individuals might exhibit similar symptoms as seen in celiac disease, but they test negative for it. And so those individuals, they must follow a gluten-free diet lifelong. But as we seen and discussed before, there are many of us following this gluten-free diet without celiac disease. So what's the impact on those without this disease? If you have irritable bowel syndrome, some research have shown that you might benefit from a gluten-free diet. Again, this is a highly individualized scenario, so it might not work for everybody with irritable bowel syndrome. How about weight loss? Well, there is no conclusive evidence to support that a gluten-free diet promotes weight loss. The weight loss that you might have heard of or experience yourself from gluten-free diet can be due to a few different reasons. So first, gluten, this protein, is in, like we discussed in 2 slides ago, are in many everyday foods, and specifically they're in a lot of processed foods. And so if your regular diet has a large amount of processed foods, and now you're on a gluten-free diet, you're cutting off gluten by replacing them with some of the naturally gluten-free foods, such as fruits and vegetables. So naturally, you're eating a healthier diet, and that could cause weight loss. And it has nothing to do with gluten, this protein itself. And another possibility is that gluten-free diet, similar to the ketogenic diet, is a very restrictive diet, and you have very limited food choices, which likely will lead to a calorie reduction. So you are just consuming less calories overall. Again, it has nothing to do with the protein gluten per se. And some research actually show weight gain in some studies. And because some gluten-free foods actually have higher calories than their counterparts. And we'll see some examples in a few slides. And in some gluten-free products, they lack whole grains and they lack fiber, because instead of the wheat flour they usually use, they might substitute with potato flour or rice flour, and those are lower in fiber. Okay, so let's talk about this common myth or tendency to think that gluten-free foods are healthier for us. They're healthier. So let's see if that holds true. So here is an example of a comparison. So you can see this is a comparison between a pancake mix and a gluten-free version of this pancake mix. So first, let's look at the price. So the original pancake mix is only $2, and the gluten-free version is $5, and that's double the price. So does that mean it's necessarily healthier? Well, let's look at the nutrition facts label. So at first glance, you might notice that the calorie content, the original, is higher than the gluten-free. But what we also know to look at is the serving size. So if you look at the original mix, the serving size is 1/3 of a cup, but the gluten-free version of this mix, the serving size is only 1/4 cup. So it's actually a smaller serving size. Therefore, you see 130 calories per serving, and the original is 150 calories per serving. And then I want to draw your attention to dietary fiber. So the original has 1 gram of fiber per serving, whereas gluten-free has 0 gram of fiber per serving. And you see the same trend in protein content as well. The original has 3 grams and the gluten-free has only 2 grams. And lastly, the iron content is also lower in gluten-free, this gluten-free mix. So let's, lastly, before we move on, let's just take a quick look at the ingredient list. So here at on the original, you can see it's the enriched flour, the bleached flour, which is just the AP flour that we commonly use. And it's normally fortified with B vitamins. Like I said, bread is the major source of B vitamins in the US. So the niacin, the thiamine, the riboflavin, and folic acid, as well as iron. But when you replace that with rice flour, as seen in the gluten-free mix, you are losing those nutrients as well. Okay, let's just quickly look at another example. This is a comparison between 2 pastas. So the bottom one is a gluten-free version and the top one is a gluten-containing pasta. And you can see a similar comparison as the previous picture. If you look at calories, gluten-free pasta actually had higher calories than the original. And similarly, the dietary fiber, the original has 5 grams and the gluten-free version has 2 grams, and protein content is also different. And here it actually shows you the B vitamins we're talking about and iron, and in comparison to the gluten-free version. So from those comparisons, we know that gluten-free foods are not necessarily healthier foods. And let's talk about some other potential harms of a gluten-free diet. So similar to the ketogenic diet, you might experience nutrition deficiencies, the B vitamins, fiber, and mineral that we talked about, and the financial cost. So here is another comparison showing the differences between price. And research has shown that gluten-free products were 242% more expensive than gluten-containing products. And we know that more expensive doesn't necessarily always mean healthier. And before we move on to our last topic, intermittent fasting, I would like just to talk about carbohydrates, because there's a common theme of the previous 2 diets is that carbohydrates, we don't want them. We want to eliminate carbohydrates. But the truth is carbohydrates are a major source of fuel and nutrients for our bodies, and it's a part of a healthy diet. And with that being said, not all carbs are created equal. And so when you're choosing, it's recommended to choose unprocessed or minimally processed whole grains, vegetables, fruits, and beans, and limit highly processed or refined foods such as white bread, pastries, and sodas. So the 2 pictures below are trying to illustrate the fact that when you're excluding carbohydrates, you are also very likely excluding all the nutrients you actually want for your body. So let's say you exclude potatoes from your diet. You're cutting off a good amount of carbohydrates. But at the same time, you're also eliminating the protein that comes with it, the fiber, calcium, potassium, iron, the B vitamins. So that's something to keep in mind. Okay, so our last diet is intermittent fasting. So fasting meaning you're not consuming any food. So it's only water usually. And intermittent can mean a lot of different regimens. So some of the popular ones are listed here. There's a daily time restricted feeding, which means you are only consuming food during a 6 to 8 hour window. And the 5 to 2 intermittent fasting is when people only eat 1 meal on 2 days each week. Or you can do complete fasting every other day, or 70% energy restriction every other day, meaning you'll eat normal one day and you either complete just no food intake for for the other day, or just consume 70% of what you normally would. And a major difference between intermittent fasting and the previous two diets is that there's no restriction of any specific food groups or nutrients. So the rationale behind intermittent fasting, we are still studying this. So those are just proposed mechanisms of its metabolic regulation on its impact on chronic diseases. So let's start with the circadian clocks. So we know that our body is very smart and it follows the circadian clock. And research has shown that the desynchronization of this clock might increase the risk of some chronic diseases. And consuming energy outside of the normal feeding phase, like late night snacking or late night meals, may disrupt energy balance. And keep in mind, these studies are mostly done in animal studies. And same with gut microbiome. We know that we have an abundance of bacteria in our stomach that is essential to our metabolic health. And in animal studies, it has been found that an extended fasting period, which gives the gut some rest, could lead to reduced gut permeability and systemic inflammation, which are typically elevated in obesity. Again, those studies are mainly done in animal studies, which means that we don't know if those results can be translated directly to human studies. And the last proposed pathway is the modifiable lifestyle factors. So diet. When you're following a fasting regimen, you might just consume less overall calories on average. So that could lead to weight loss. And there's more and more research looking into intermittent fasting dieters and their sleep and their physical activity levels. But we need more research to have a conclusion on those two aspects. Oh, so now let's focus on weight loss. So most trials, most studies that had an isocaloric control group, meaning that they're consuming the same amount of calories as the intermittent fasting group, have reported similar weight loss between intermittent fasting and control groups. And one study showed a greater loss of body fat in the intermittent fasting group over 4 months. But that's just one study, and it's only short-term effect. And what's interesting is that intermittent fasting does not appear to lead to overconsumption on non-fasting days. I thought that was as interesting, because when you think that you are just not eating anything for a day, the next day you might just overconsume like 4,000, 5,000 calories. But in research, we did not see that. So to conclude the relationship between intermittent fasting and weight loss, alternate day fasting has not been proven to be superior compared to continuous calorie restriction weight loss plans. And some of the other challenges that you might experience when following the fasting regimen is an increased sensation of hunger on fasting days and or preoccupation with food. And skipping meals and severely limiting calories can be dangerous for some people. For example, people with diabetes. For people with diabetes, your glucose levels are very sensitive. They need to be, tightly controlled and monitored. And skipping meals might have an impact on your blood glucose level. And the same goes with those who are taking blood pressure and heart disease medications. There might be an interaction. So now we've talked about all those 3 diets. There are some key takeaways I like to mention. One thing that's important to know is that many of the clinical trials looking at diets that were included in this presentation were conducted in individuals with overweight or obesity, which means if those results that we're seeing may or may not be the same for those without overweight or obesity. So we need to take those results with a grain of salt. Secondly, when you are whenever you're looking at nutrition research, it's good to know that dietary components are very hard to study separately. For example, when we're looking at the keto diet and weight loss, if you see a weight loss, it's hard for us to conclude whether the weight loss is due to the high fat component of the diet or the low carbohydrate component of the diet. So it's very hard to draw the conclusion. And overall, the biggest take-home message, and to answer some of your questions about what is the best diet, whether this diet is good for me or not, I would say sustainability is key. It's key to find an eating habit that works. Oops, keep doing that. That works for you in the long term. And the key thing here is that works for you with your specific health conditions and habits and just circumstances, not a diet that worked for your friends or family members. And another important point is that you want it to work in the long term, not just a few months, not just 1 year, but long term. And before you make any drastic dietary change, you will want to take your health conditions and medications into account. Like we discussed, many of those dietary changes might interact with your health conditions and the medications. And so you will want to discuss with your healthcare providers or dietitians before you make those changes. And here are just some action items and a summary for what we talked about. So the ketogenic diet is a high fat and low carbohydrate diet in the state of ketosis. And gluten-free diet, you eliminate anything that contains the protein gluten. So commonly seen are some of the sources are wheat bread, pastries, pasta, and soy sauce. Intermittent fasting is no caloric intake for extended period of time. And how long that is, that can vary a lot. There are different regimens there. And ketogenic diet was initially created for children with drug-resistant epilepsy, and gluten-free is for people with celiac disease or gluten sensitivity. And for intermittent fasting, there's not a specific population. And lastly, some of the possible side effects of ketogenic diet include constipation, fatigue, confusion, lightheadedness, and long-term nutrient deficiencies. And similarly, gluten-free, you might also see gluten deficiencies and potential financial burden. And lastly, intermittent fasting, you might experience an intense hunger sensation and preoccupation with food. So the last slide, I want to share some resources with you. So the first one is the My Plate method. It is a USDA recommended method to a simple way to build a healthy eating habits. And you can find more following this website. But basically, it's an easy way to visualize a healthy plate. You can see the picture on the right. You, for each meal, look at your plate. Half of your plate should be filled by fruits and vegetables, and about a quarter grains and a quarter protein, and a side of dairy. And know that calcium fortified soy milk is also considered in a dairy group. And for ketogenic diet, it is recommended to me that this podcast, they talk about the ketogenic diet in more in depth. So if you're interested, I recommend you to listen to this. And lastly, we know that gluten is everywhere and it's hard to keep track and to memorize. And so I recommend you to check out this website, the Celiac Disease Foundation. They have extensive information and resources on foods containing gluten and more on the celiac disease. And that concludes my presentation. Next week at the same time, you will have Dr. Catherine Hatcher talking to you about the in and outs of menopause, research-based strategies to improve your wellness during midlife. And thank you so much, everyone, for attending this presentation. And I will be happy to take any questions.
All right, thank you, Ru. We do have a couple that have appeared in the chat box. just recently, and so they found your presentation to be so interesting. Is there any chance for a presentation on other diets, such as the paleo, Atkins, or juice diets?
Yeah, I would love
Maybe.
to. Yeah, I would love to talk more about those diets if there's opportunity, and I would love to share some resources, maybe through email after the presentation on those diets.
Okay. And what about research? What does research say about the 6 to 8 hour window version of the intermittent fasting?
I didn't specifically look into that regimen specifically. Most of the research is done on alternate day fasting. So I'm not too sure about that, but I can certainly look into that and include that in the email.
Okay. And what if someone has high blood pressure and diabetes and they know they need to lose weight? They're aware that intermittent fasting is probably not the best choice. Do you think that they would be able to try the keto diet if they have high blood pressure and diabetes?
Mm-hmm. I think that short answer might not be everyone's favorite answer is it depends. I know diabetes is a very individualized condition. And so because everyone's at different stage and you're taking different, whether or not you're taking insulin, whether or not you're taking medications, that all plays, you all need to take that into account when you make dietary changes. And again, it's definitely possible for you to try the ketogenic diet, but it is usually a drastic change. So I would definitely consult with your primary care provider to discuss.
We have some questions about cleanses.
Mm-hmm. What?
Just, do you have any information on the cleanses? Would that be like a juice or something like that?
I didn't, and for this presentation, I didn't look too in depth on cleansing, and there are so many different versions of cleansing. But for me, I will go back to the takeaway message that sustainability is key, because you don't, when you're changing your diet, you don't want to just change it for 6 months and only see the effect for 6 months. You want to be able to sustain the diet in the long term. So I think a question to ask ourselves is that, is cleansing is something that I can sustain a long term, both for yourself and health wise. I imagine when it comes to cleansing, you're more prone to nutrient deficiency, so you might need to pay really close attention to those as well, and you might want to ask yourself if that's something that you're able to do.
All right, thank you so much, Ru. And as we said, Ru is going to save the chat box. Some of you asked some specific questions about specific diets, and we'll let Ru answer that then via email. Now, you will all be getting an online survey. I think we're going to put that link in the chat box. And please know that your feedback is incredibly valuable to us, and we'd love to hear from you about what topics you'd like to learn more about. Well, some of you have already asked about that, so that's good. And then as there's the Qualtrics link right there. And as Ru said, that our next webinar will be next week, June 30th, and it's going to be the ins and outs of menopause. And we would love for you to join us then. As we have said, everything will be recorded. You will be sent the slides and handouts. And I think that I could conclude and say, thank you so much, Ru. I know that I learned a few things, and your presentation style was very engaging, and you were easy to listen to, and certainly gave us some good information. So I appreciate that. And we want everyone to have a wonderful rest of your day. It looks like it's a beautiful day out there, so I hope you can all enjoy it.
Thank you so much, everyone. Appreciate it.
Yes, and if you